Okay, so seduction and NLP. Huh, looks like someone's been doing their research, getting ready for Valentine's Day, maybe. But really, we've got this fascinating set of sources, and they're all about how people are using neurolinguistic programming to, well, let's just say, be more persuasive.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. The way these sources lay it all out, it's like a step-by-step system for seduction, almost like a playbook. They talk about using all these techniques like building rapport, manipulating beliefs, even controlling someone's state of mind.
It is, right. It's like we're getting this like behind the scenes look at how a master manipulator works their magic. But just to be clear, right off the bat, this deep dive, it's not about endorsing these methods. It's about giving you the knowledge so you can see how it works.
Exactly. And to really get how it all works, you got to understand the power of rapport.
Right, rapport. It's like the bedrock of any successful interaction, but especially when we're talking about seduction, all these sources, they really drive that point home. Without that connection, nothing else really works.
It's true. I mean, think about it like you're trying to build a house on sand. You need a strong foundation and rapport. That's the foundation.
So how do they explain it in the sources?
Well, they talk about it in terms of these mental filters. We all have our beliefs, values, past experiences. They act as gatekeepers, deciding what information we let in and what we block. And rapport, it's the key to unlocking those gates.
So if you can build rapport with someone, you're basically creating a shortcut, right, to their subconscious. You're getting past those conscious defenses and building a deeper connection.
That's the idea.
Okay, that makes sense. But hold on a sec. What about, those stereotypical jerks? You know the type. The ones who seem to attract people without even trying. It doesn't really seem like they're building rapport.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, the sources address that directly. It's interesting because even those jerks, who seem insensitive or aloof, even they can create a kind of rapport. It often works by tapping into very specific insecurities or desires.
Oh, yeah. One of the sources had this example, and it was, well, it's kind of disturbing. This guy who calls himself a jerk basically affirmed this woman's really negative self-image. And get this, by doing that, he created this strange kind of connection with her. I mean, it's obviously manipulative, but it shows you just how powerful, even twisted, rapport can be.
It does. It shows that rapport itself, I mean, it's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's more like a tool. It can be used ethically to build a healthy relationship, or it can be used to exploit and manipulate. And that's why understanding these techniques, it's so important. It gives you the power to figure out how someone's using rapport and to protect yourself if you need to.
So how do these, like, so-called seduction masters actually build rapport?
The sources break it down to two main categories: speech and physiology.
Okay, so let's start with speech. What are, like, the main techniques they use?
Well, one of the most common, and it's surprisingly effective, is mirroring. It's
Yeah.
about subtly matching the other person's speech patterns, their pace, tone, the words they emphasize, even their body language.
So if someone's like talking really fast and they've got all this energy, I should try to match that. But it sounds like I'm like mimicking them.
It's not exactly mimicking. Mirroring, it's more about finding a natural rhythm with the other person. It's about creating this sense of harmony, this connection, not about just copying their every move. The sources, they really stress that subtlety is key here. If you're too obvious about it, it can backfire big time and come off as totally fake.
Yeah, that makes sense. The sources also mentioned something called trans words. What are those exactly?
Trans words are the words and, the phrases that someone uses over and over again, or the words they emphasize a lot in their speech. They often reveal a lot about like a person's values and their priorities. By incorporating those trans words into your own conversation, you're basically sending a signal that you understand and connect with them on this deeper level.
So it's like you're speaking their language, both figuratively and literally, like finding that shared vocabulary that clicks with them, but on a subconscious level.
Exactly. The sources have this great example. They talk about this woman describing a beach vacation, and she keeps using words like warm and relaxed. And by reflecting those same words back to her, the person she's talking to is like subconsciously reinforcing that connection, making her feel even more understood.
Okay. So by using mirroring and paying attention to these trans words, you can start to build rapport through speech. But what about physiology? How does body language factor in?
Well, nonverbal communication, it's just as important as verbal communication, sometimes even more so. And when it comes to building rapport, mirroring, it plays a key role here too. It's about subtly reflecting the other person's posture, gestures, even their breathing patterns. But
Yeah.
again, you got to do it with like finesse.
So, like, if they lean forward, I lean forward. If they cross their legs, I cross mine.
You got it. But timing is everything. You don't want to mirror every single movement right away. It's going to feel, well, weird and forced. The sources recommend starting with like a slight delay, maybe 3 seconds or so, and then gradually, reducing that delay as that rapport gets deeper.
So you're kind of creating this like dance, right, of nonverbal synchronicity. You're using mirroring to build that connection, and then gradually you're taking the lead to steer the interaction. That sounds pretty strategic.
It is. But remember, the ultimate goal of this whole dance isn't just to mirror somebody's movements.
Hmm.
It's about influencing their state of mind. And that brings us to, well, our next point.
States of mind. Ooh, this is where things start to get juicy. But before we get into that, I gotta ask, what stands out to you from all this so far? You more intrigued by like those mental filters or this whole concept of mirroring and subtly leading someone's behavior?
What's really getting to me is how much of our communication is happening under the surface. We're sending and receiving all these signals, influencing each other, and we don't even realize it. These sources, they're basically shining a light on those subconscious processes, giving us a glimpse into this, like, hidden world of human interaction.
It is. It's like we're learning a secret language. But before we get too carried away with our new decoder rings, let's talk about those states of mind and see how they fit into all of this.
Okay, let's do it. Let's break it down. In NLP, a state, it refers to this combo of our internal experience, our thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations, and our external behavior. It's basically like a snapshot of our mind and body at a specific moment.
So it's kind of like a temporary mental and emotional landscape
Right.
that shapes how we see and interact with the world.
Exactly. And here's why states are so important. They decide. Our actions, our decisions, even how we see reality. Change someone's state, and you can change their whole experience.
Hmm. Okay, I see where this is going. But how does this connect to seduction specifically?
Well, the sources suggest that seduction is basically all about steering someone into a particular state of mind, a state of attraction, openness, and then, eventually desire.
So it's not just about saying the right things or, making the right moves. It's about creating an internal experience for that other person, an experience that like leads them toward that yes state.
You got it. And that's where all those techniques we've been talking about, they come into play. Mirroring, pacing, leading. They're all tools to subtly influence someone's state, guiding them towards what you want.
So it's almost like you're what, like an emotional architect. You're designing and building a certain state of mind within the other person.
That is a great analogy.
Yeah.
And just like with any form of architecture, the ethics of controlling someone's state depends totally on what your intention is. Are you using it to create an experience that benefits both people, or are you trying to manipulate someone just to get what you want? That's a question we should always be asking ourselves.
Right, got to keep that ethical compass on hand. But I'm still like a little fuzzy on how we actually control or influence someone's state. What are the levers we can pull?
Well, the sources say that states are mainly driven by our internal representations, those images, sounds, feelings, and words that we experience in our minds. If you can change those internal elements, well, you can change the state.
So if I want someone to feel happy, I'd like try to bring up happy memories, tell them jokes, play some upbeat music, stuff like that.
You're on the right track. It's about using language, storytelling, sensory cues, all those things to shift their internal landscape.
This is starting to feel like mind control, though. Is that what we're talking about here?
Not exactly. Mind control, it implies force and manipulation. What we're discussing here is influence. It's about subtle nudges that can move someone's state in a certain direction. And, like we already said, the ethics of influence depend totally on the intention behind it.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better. But let's be real, some of these techniques, they can feel kind of manipulative, especially if you're using them without the other person's consent or awareness. Where do we draw the line between influence and, straight up coercion?
That's a tough question. And in the end, it comes down to each person's values and boundaries. But I think the main difference is this. Are you using these techniques to create a win-win situation, or are you trying to exploit someone for your own personal gain?
Right, consent. It's crucial. It's the difference between a dance where you're both in sync and like being dragged onto the dance floor against your will.
Exactly. And that's why it's important to remember that the best seduction, at least according to these sources, it's built on mutual attraction and a genuine desire to connect. It's about creating a space where both people feel safe and, empowered to explore their desires.
Okay, I'm feeling a bit more grounded now. State control. when used ethically, can be a powerful way to deepen a connection and create these experiences that are fun for both people. But I'm really curious to hear more about how all this ties into that ultimate goal of seduction, reaching that, what do the sources call it, that threshold of action.
Ah, yes, the threshold of action. Now things are getting really interesting. Ready for some spicy metaphors?
Bring it on. Our listeners are in for a wild ride.
All right, so the threshold of action, it's basically like the point of no return in seduction, that moment when someone is totally open to, being intimate.
Okay, I'm listening. But fair warning, our listeners, they're pretty sharp. They're going to want more than just like vague
Oh, for
descriptions.
sure. Well, the sources, they use this like really fascinating metaphor. Imagine someone's brain as this network of 100 neurons,
Yeah.
right? And each neuron can either be a yes or a no when it comes to taking action. In this case, we're talking about, the decision to get intimate.
So every interaction, every word, every gesture, it's like flipping one of those neurons either towards a yes or a no.
Exactly. And the threshold of action, it's that magic point where all 100 neurons are flipped to yes. It's total alignment, like all the doubt and resistance just vanish.
So the goal of seduction, at least in this framework, is to strategically flip those neurons one by one until you get to that 100% yes state.
You got it. And that's where all those techniques we talked about earlier, building rapport, state control, mirroring, leading, that's where they all come in. They're the tools you use to navigate this, like intricate neural network and lead someone towards that threshold.
So it's almost like you're playing this like high stakes game of persuasion, trying to outmaneuver the other person's defenses.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. But it's so important to remember that this isn't about forcing anything or manipulating anyone. The best seducers, they're the ones who can create this genuine connection, a shared desire that makes reaching that threshold feel, natural and exciting for both people.
So it's not about like twisting someone's arm, but about making an environment where what they want just lines up perfectly with what you want.
Exactly. It's about co-creating an experience that feels good and empowering for everyone involved.
This is starting to make sense, but I gotta be honest, some of these techniques, they sound a little, I don't know, like mind games. How do we make sure we're not crossing the line into manipulation?
That's a totally valid concern, and it's something we should all be thinking about. The key, like the sources emphasize, is your intention. Are you using these techniques to actually connect with someone, or are you just trying to get what you want?
So again, it comes back to intention. Are you coming into this with respect and wanting both people to enjoy it, or are you just trying to use someone for your own, like, selfish reasons?
Exactly. The ethics of seduction, just like any other way people interact, they come down to the heart and mind behind the actions.
Okay, so let's say we're going about this the right way, with good intentions, and we want to create that genuine connection. What are some actual techniques we can use to get someone closer to that threshold of action?
Well, the sources talk about a whole bunch of techniques, but they all come back to understanding and influencing someone's internal representations. Those images, sounds, feelings, and words that shape their experience.
So we're talking about tapping into their senses, their emotions, their imagination to make this irresistible internal world.
Exactly. For example, if you want to evoke feelings of desire, you might use really evocative language, tell an amazing story, or even use like touch and smell to trigger all sorts of pleasurable feelings.
It's like you're this composer creating a symphony of seduction. You're using different instruments to get those specific emotions and reactions.
I love that analogy. But remember, music, it's most powerful when it's played with skill and feeling. And the same goes for seduction. You got to use these techniques in a way that feels real and respectful, always honoring the other person's boundaries and choices.
Right, we're not talking about mind control or tricks. It's got to be something that feels good for both people.
Absolutely. And one of the most effective ways to do that, it's through like really good storytelling. The sources really hit on the power of narratives to grab someone's imagination and take them to this whole other state of mind.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. So how does storytelling actually work in this context? Are we talking about like telling fairy tales or sharing personal stories?
It could be, but it's more about understanding like the basic structure of a good story and using that to your advantage. A good story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It builds suspense, creates anticipation, and in the end, it gives you that satisfying resolution.
So you're essentially creating this narrative that takes the other person on a journey that ends at that threshold of action moment.
You got it. And inside that story, you can weave in all these suggestive words, sensory details, and emotional triggers that gently guide their thoughts and feelings where you want them to go.
So it's like you're planting seeds in their subconscious, watering them with your words, and watching them bloom into this, like, garden of desire.
That's beautiful. But remember, just like with gardening, patience and care are key. You can't force a flower to bloom before it's ready. In the same way, you can't force someone to reach that threshold of action before they're really open to it.
So you're creating the right environment, the right mood, and then letting things happen naturally.
Exactly. And a big part of creating that atmosphere is something called anchoring. Have you ever noticed how a certain song or smell can, like, instantly take you back to a specific memory or feeling?
Oh, yeah, totally. Like that one song that always makes me think of my first love. Or like the smell of baking cookies that reminds me of my grandma's kitchen.
Exactly. That's anchoring in action. It's connecting a specific trigger, whether it's a word, a touch, a sound, or a smell, with a particular state of mind.
So how does this work with seduction? Are we talking about like playing Barry White and lighting scented candles?
Well, it could be as simple as that. But the real power of anchoring,
Hmm.
it's in its subtlety. It's about making those connections subconsciously so the other person doesn't even know they're being influenced.
So you might like casually touch their arm while telling a funny story, or use a specific word or phrase while they're feeling really good.
Exactly. And over time, those subtle anchors, they get embedded in their subconscious. So whenever they come across that trigger, they automatically go back to that desired state of mind.
It's like you're creating a secret code, right? These triggers that unlock all those feelings of attraction and desire.
You got it. And what's really cool about anchoring is that you can use it to make all kinds of good connections, not just for seduction. It can help build confidence, reduce anxiety, even make you more creative.
So it's like a multi-purpose tool you can use in tons of different areas of life. But let's stick with seduction for a minute. You've talked about storytelling, anchoring, sensory cues.
Mhm.
What other techniques can we use to get someone closer to that threshold of action?
One of the most powerful and maybe the most controversial is something called embedded commands. It's a way of using language to, like, slip past someone's conscious defenses and put suggestions right into their subconscious mind.
Wait, that sounds a little like hypnosis. How does that actually work?
It's not about, like, swinging a pocket watch and saying, "You are getting sleepy." Embedded commands are way more subtle. It's about using a certain tone of voice and emphasis to highlight certain words or phrases in a sentence.
So you might say something like, I wonder if you can feel how relaxed you are right now, emphasizing the words feel and relaxed to make them actually feel that way.
Exactly. And because those words are tucked inside a normal sentence, the conscious mind doesn't always pick up on it, but the subconscious, it just absorbs it right up.
It's like a subliminal message hiding in plain sight.
Exactly. And even though this technique can be super effective, it's really important to use it ethically and carefully. The sources, they warn against using embedded commands to manipulate or pressure someone into doing something they don't want to do.
Right. We always got to remember respect and consent are the most important things when it comes to seduction. But I'm still kind of curious about this whole threshold of action thing. Is it really possible to get someone to that point where they're 100% down for, intimacy?
Well, it's not always like flipping a switch. People are complicated. They have their own unique desires and boundaries. But when you understand the psychology of seduction and you use these techniques well, you can definitely make it more likely for someone to say yes.
So it's not about like guarantees, but about creating the best possible setup for an experience both people will enjoy.
Exactly. And even if you do reach that threshold of action, it doesn't mean the other person is giving up their free will. They still get to decide how they want to move forward.
So it's about making a space where both people feel in control of their decisions while also feeling excited and, enthusiastic about exploring the possibilities together.
Exactly. And that's what makes seduction so cool when it's done right. It's this dance of desire, this playful way of exploring boundaries, this journey of discovery that can lead to some really magical experiences.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get the whole seduction game a little better, but there's one piece I'm still not getting. The sources mention something called state control as a key part of getting to that threshold of action. Can you break that down for me?
Ah, yes, state control. It's basically the art of influencing someone's emotions and mental state in a way that makes them more open to, well, your advances. Remember how we were talking about how our states, our thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations,
Yeah.
they shape how we see things and act?
Yeah, it's like our state is the lens we see the world through.
Exactly. And with seduction, the goal is to guide someone into a state of mind that makes them more open to intimacy, That might be relaxation, excitement, playfulness, even vulnerability, depending on the vibe you're going for.
So how do you actually control someone's state? Is it about saying the right things or setting a certain mood?
It's a little of both. Masterful seducers use a mix of techniques. They might use their voice, tone, and body language to make someone feel calm and connected. They might tell stories that bring up certain emotions, or use sensory things to trigger pleasurable feelings.
So you're using all those tools we talked about to create like a specific emotional experience for the other person.
You got it. And one of the best ways to control someone's state is to understand and use something called submodalities.
Submodalities. Now that sounds interesting. What are those?
Submodalities, they're basically the tiny building blocks of our internal representations. They're the specific things that make up our internal images, sounds, feelings, even the way we talk to ourselves.
So if I'm picturing a beach vacation, for example, the submodalities would be things like how bright the sun is, the color of the water, how warm the sand is, the sound of the waves.
You nailed it. And here's the cool part. By subtly changing those submodalities, you can actually change how someone feels about an experience.
So if I wanted someone to feel more relaxed about that beach vacation, I might dim the sun, soften the colors, and slow down the sound of the waves.
Exactly. By tweaking those little details, you can change the whole emotional feeling of the experience. And in seduction, this is super powerful. You can use submodalities to make feelings of attraction stronger, create a sense of closeness, or even make feelings of resistance disappear.
Wow, this is starting to feel like some kind of secret code, a hidden language of persuasion. But honestly, it also feels a little manipulative. Are we crossing a line if we're messing with someone's internal world without them knowing?
That's a really good point, and it's something we should always be careful about. Like we talked about before, the key is your intention. Are you using these techniques to really connect with someone or just to get something from them?
Right, it always goes back to ethics. But I'm still really intrigued by this fake control thing. It sounds like it could be used for good or bad.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to understand how it works. When you're aware of these techniques, you can not only use them to make your own interactions better, but also to protect yourself from being manipulated by others.
Okay, I definitely feel more empowered now. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this? What's the most important lesson when it comes to understanding seduction?
I think the most important thing to remember is this. Seduction isn't about tricks or manipulation. It's about understanding those subtle things that happen in human interaction and using that knowledge to create connections that are both fun and meaningful.
So it's about approaching seduction with respect, authenticity, and a genuine desire to connect on a deeper level.
Exactly. And remember, even though we've been talking about romantic attraction, these ideas apply to any kind of human interaction. Whether you're building rapport at a business meeting, connecting with a friend, or even influencing your kids.
So these are valuable skills you can use in every part of life. Well, I think we've covered a lot today. We've explored seduction, from building rapport to state control to that tricky threshold of action. I hope our listeners feel as informed and empowered as I do.
Me too. It's been an amazing trip into how humans behave. And I think the coolest part is that this is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore and discover about the power of persuasion and the art of connection.
Well said. So listeners, stay curious, keep learning, and remember that the best seduction always starts with a real connection and mutual respect. Okay, so we've talked about rapport, state control, mirroring, anchoring, all these fascinating techniques that people use in seduction. But how does it all actually come together to help someone reach that threshold of action?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? It's like we've got all these ingredients, but now we need to figure out how to bake the cake. How to mix all these things together to make that perfect seduction cocktail.
Exactly. You can't just throw all these techniques at someone and hope something works. There's got to be a strategy, right?
Yeah.
Some method to all this.
And that's where the sources, they get really interesting. They talk about seduction as a process of calibration. You're always reading the other person's signals, and you adjust your approach based on what you're seeing.
So it's not about following a script or a rule book. It's about being in the moment, paying attention, and reacting to those little things that happen during the interaction.
Exactly. Imagine it like a dance where you're always adjusting your steps to match your partner.
Okay, I like that. But how do you actually calibrate? What are the things you should be looking for?
Well, it starts with noticing both what they say and what they do with their body. Are they leaning in or pulling back? Are their pupils bigger or smaller? Are they mirroring your body language? or are they creating distance?
So you're basically looking for those subtle hints of interest or lack of interest.
You got it. And as you're picking up on this info, you're also adjusting your own behavior, your tone of voice, your touch, your pacing to either like deepen the connection or give them space,
Yeah.
depending on how they're responding.
So it's like this constant feedback loop, right? This delicate dance where each move leads to the next.
That's a great way to put it. And as you get better at calibration, you'll start to just know what works and what doesn't. You'll know when to move forward, when to step back, and when to just let the interaction happen naturally.
Okay, so calibration is super important. But let's circle back to that threshold of action for a second. Is it really possible to get someone to a place where they're like totally on board with being intimate?
Well, like I said before, it's not always a simple on-off switch. People are complicated,
Hmm.
they've got their own desires and boundaries. But by understanding how seduction works and using these techniques in a skillful way, you can definitely make it more likely that someone will say yes.
So it's not about guarantees, but about making the ideal situation for an experience that's enjoyable for everyone involved.
Exactly. And even if you do reach that threshold of action, it doesn't mean the other person has given up their free will. They still get to make the final decision about how they want things to go.
So it's about creating an environment where both people feel like they have control over their choices and they also feel excited and, eager about exploring what's possible together.
That's it. And that's what makes seduction so fascinating. It's this blend of psychology, persuasion, and genuine connection. It's this dance of desire, this fun way of testing boundaries, this journey of discovery that can lead to some truly amazing experiences.
Well, I think our listeners are walking away with a ton of knowledge about the art and science of seduction. We've covered how important rapport is, the power of state control, and how calibration helps us reach that elusive threshold of action.
It's been such a cool journey into how people behave, right?
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing to remember is this. Seduction isn't about tricks or manipulation. It's about getting those subtle things that go on in human interactions and using that knowledge to make connections that are both pleasurable and meaningful.
Exactly. It's
Mm.
about approaching seduction with authenticity, respect, and a real desire to connect on a deeper level. So, listeners, use this knowledge wisely and ethically. And as always, keep exploring this fascinating world of human psychology.